Hello. In this AppLab tutorial, we're going to learn how to use the database feature of Code.org's AppLab. Specifically, we're going to learn how to record data into a table, and then we're going to learn how to search through that data to find the highest score. Before watching this video, you're going to want to have a good understanding of how arrays work in JavaScript. For more information on that topic, please click on the video link in the upper right-hand corner of this screen. So for practice, we're going to create a program that records high scores and then retrieves and displays the highest score in the database. First, we're going to create an interface. So we're going to go over to Design. Then we're going to grab a label. We're going to put it over here. So the properties, we'll start with the ID. Now I like to start all my labels with LBL, and then I'm going to name it name. So it'll be addressed in code as LBL name. The text, I'm just going to leave blank for now. The width, I'm going to make it 250 pixels wide by 45 high. Then I'm going to go down to font size, and I'm going to set it to 40. Now I'm going to set the border width to 1 pixel so we can see the edge of it. Okay, next I'm going to make a label to hold the score. So I'm going to grab another label and try to line it up right about there. Okay, now I'm going to start with LBL again in the ID. I'm going to call this one score. I'm going to delete the default text for now. Same width and height, width of 250 pixels. Then a height of 45 pixels. Then I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to set the text size to 40. And again, I'm going to give it a border width of 1 pixel. So there I've got the two labels that are going to display the high score name and the high score value. Next, I need two text input boxes so we can input values. So I'm going to grab a text input, line it up there. I'm going to start out with txt. I'm going to call it txt name. Placeholder is what's going to be in there until somebody types something in. So I'm going to put in name, that way the user knows to type their name in there. The default size, I'm going to make it 200 by 30. I'm going to leave it right like that. Then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to set the font size to 30. Now I'm going to make a second text box. So grab a text input, again line it up right there. Okay. I'm going to call this txt score. The placeholder is going to be score. So that way we can input names and scores. The width I'm going to leave at 200 and the height at 30. I'm going to go down to my font size and I'm going to set this to 30 again. And then finally I need a button. When we click on it, it'll enter whatever's in the name and whatever's in the score text boxes into the database. So I'm going to grab a button. Properties, the ID. Since it's a button, I'm going to start out with BTN. And then the name of the button is record because it's going to record the values. The text, I'm going to change this to record score. Then the width, I'm going to set to 120. The height, I'm going to set to 70. Then I'm going to scroll down to font size. And I'm going to set it to 25. There we go, we've got our button. Now I'm going to go to events because I'm going to create an event listener for this button. So I'm going to go to events. I'm going to hit insert and show code. So now whenever BTN record is clicked, it's going to run this callback function here. By default, it's just going to output BTN record clicked. And I'm going to get rid of this because I don't want to do that. I'm going to do some other things. Now I'm going to go create the data table. So I'm going to go to data. And then I'm going to add a table. I'm going to call my table high underscore score. And I'm going to add this table. Now it automatically gives us an ID. And that's automatically generated when we add in. I'm going to add in 2 more columns. So there's 2 more pieces of data other than the ID that will record each time we create an entry in this table. So the first one is going to be name, and then the second one is going to be score. Click off there, and then we've got name and score. And we're going to go back to data. So we see we've got our high score table. And then now we're going to go back to code so we can actually start writing the program. We see there's a yellow triangle here, and that's a warning that there might be a problem. So let's highlight and see what it says. And it says event is defined, but it's not called in your program. And that's fine. Event is a parameter for this anonymous callback function here, and we aren't using it inside this function, and that's okay. It's just warning us that this could be a problem. Sometimes you'll also see a red square, and that you got to look at because that's definitely going to be a problem, and you want to figure out what's going on with that. We're going to move this down a little bit because we're going to work on this event listener later. We're going to go up to the top, and we're going to declare a couple of global variables. And what a global variable is, it's a variable that's declared outside of a function, and it exists throughout the lifetime of the program, and it's accessible through any of the functions. So I'm going to say var high score, and we'll start by defaulting it to equal 0. Then we'll say var high score name, and then we'll default equal to a string, and it's a string of text, so we've got it inside quotation marks, and we'll just say no name. And we'll end that with a semicolon. Now when I say it's valid throughout the lifetime of the program, the lifetime of a run of a program. So if we stop the program and restart it, these values are going to reset to 0 and no name. That's why we're going to use the database to store the data permanently. Next, what we need to do is we need to create a function that's going to allow us to display the high scores in these two text boxes. So we're going to go to functions. We're going to grab a function. We'll drag it here. And then instead of calling it my function, I want to call it display high score. So then we're going to go inside, and the function begins at this curly bracket here, and it ends at that curly bracket here. The first thing I want to do is I want to set this first text box to whatever the value of the global variable high score name is, and then the second one to whatever the value of the high score is. For the name, I'm going to say set text, because the name is going to be text. Then I'm open close parentheses. Now, you see this needs two arguments. It needs the ID of the object we're setting, and then what value do we want the text to be. So this will be in quotation marks, and we want to set LBL name. Then we're done with that string, so we have a comma. Let it know we're ready for the second argument. It's underlining that one. So the text, we want whatever the text is in the high score name variable. So we're going to say high score name. We're going to end that with a semicolon. Now we want to set the score label to whatever the value of the high score global variable is. So we're going to say set number, open close parentheses again. So now we got the cursor inside those parentheses. So at first it needs the ID. So we want LBL score, then comma. Our second argument is what number. So we want whatever number is in the high score variable. Then we'll end this with a semicolon. Now this won't automatically get called. So we're going to actually create a couple new lines here. And then after we create these global variables, we're going to call the display high score function. So it'll set the text. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function to find the high score. So what it's going to do is it's going to go through our database, and we haven't created any entries in databases yet, but it's going to go through the database and it's going to look at each scores and figure out which value is the highest. So I'm going to grab another function, and I could type this out if I wanted to. I'm just dragging and dropping instead. So I'm going to close this toolbox for now to give me a little more room. Change this to find high score. The next thing I need to do is I need to pull down all the records from the table. So I'm going to open my toolbox again, and I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to grab a read records request. Read records request is right here. Okay, so let's kind of change some things in here, okay? So first of all, we're reading the records, and we don't want to pull it out of my table because I don't have a table called my table. My table is called high_score. So I'm going to change this to high_score. Then it's got another callback function. Now, this is what's called asymmetric programming, because it's going to read the records, but it's going to continue doing other stuff before it's done reading the records, because reading the records could take a little bit of time, so it doesn't want to stall the program. So the callback function, this function here, won't run until it's loaded the read records. So I want everything inside this callback function, because I don't want it searching through the records until it's finished reading the records. I'm going to close this out real quick, give myself a little more room. So you notice this function, it doesn't have a name. It's called an anonymous function. It's also a callback function, but it's called an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. This one, for example, does have a name. And it's got a parameter called records. So it's going to return the entire data table. And it's going to return it in an array. And each index of the array is going to hold an object. And each object is going to have 3 parts. In the case of mine, 3 parts. It's going to have an ID, a name, and a score. Now, if you did a different table, yours might have more or less than 3 parts to each of those indexes. So let's go back to code. So now what this is doing is this already gave us a for loop, and we could have written this ourselves. It's going to go through the entire records, starting at 0 and then going up through the length of the records, however long that is. Now in this case, it's just going to print out the ID and the name. Now we're going to have it do some different things here. So I'm going to get rid of this here. So I'm still inside my for loop. What I want to do is I want to check, is the score in each of those records higher than my high score? And if it is, I want to change this high score variable to whatever the high score is, and then the name attached to that high score. I'm going to change high score name equal to that name. So I'm going to say if records index I. So since this is an array, it's going to have a bunch of different compartments. And so there's going to be a compartment 0, a compartment 1, a compartment 2, and each of those is going to hold a different object. And, you know, whatever I is at any given time, that's the compartment it's going to look at. So I'm going to say if records I.score. So it's going to pull the score value out of whatever object is in whatever compartment we're in right now. So if that score in that compartment is greater than the high score, and of course the high score is our global variable which starts out at 0, then we're going to do a few things. So I'm going to open some squiggly brackets. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the high score, the global variable high score, equal to records index I dot score. So we're going to pull the score out of the object of whatever compartment we're looking in, depending on the value of I. Next, we're going to set high score name equal to records index I dot name. Because there will be a name in that object and a score in that object. We want to set our global variable high score equal to the score in that one object and the name in that one object. Okay, lastly, once we go through our entire for loop, so we see our for loop starts here. We click, we can select that one there and we can see it ends there. After we're done going through the for loop and we found if any of the scores are higher, then we're going to call display high score again. So we're going to say display high score, and then again it'll just update these 2 labels based on whatever the new, if there is a new value of these 2 global variables. We're actually going to go back up here and we're going to call find high score first. So we're going to find the high score before we label it. So we're going to say find high score, open close parentheses. The final thing we have to do is we have to go down and take a look at this button click event. And what we're going to do is when we click the button, we're going to pull the data out of these 2 text boxes. And we're going to do 2 things. First, we're going to enter it in our database. And second, we're going to check to see if the values are higher than the high score. If they are, then we're going to change these labels. So let's go here. Again, we're inside this callback function. and we're going to create some local variables. Now these local variables are only valid inside this function, and they're local variables because we're declaring them with the var keyword inside a function. So we'll say current name, then a name is text, so we're going to say get text, open close parentheses, then we're going to get it out of the text box called txt name. And we'll end that line with a semicolon. Now we got to get the score out of this text box. So we're going to say var current score equals. Now in this case we're not going to get text, we're going to get a number, and it's important that we use get number because otherwise it'll still pull the data out. It'll just pull it out as a text object, and we want to make sure we're pulling out as a number object. So we're going to pull it out of txt score. Okay, and that with a semicolon. Now we've got to enter these into the record because we're going to be keeping track of every record that's entered, whether it's high or not. So I'm going to open my toolbox again. I'm going to go back to data, and I'm going to say create record. I'm going to drag this right down there. Let's put another line there to make it easier to read. Now let's close our toolbox. Now again, it's trying to record it in my table, and that's not the name of our table. The name of our table is high underscore score. Make sure it's the right name. Now here's what it's trying to record. It's trying to record the string Alice in the name field, and that's not what we want. So in the name field, we want to record whatever's in the variable current name. So the first part of it is going to be whatever the column in the table is. The second part of it is going to be whatever variable holds the data you're trying to record. Now the first thing we want to do is record the name, and the second thing we want to do is record the score. So the second column that we're trying to record is score. So we're going to say score, and then a colon. And what we're recording to that score column is whatever's in the current score variable. Current score. Okay. And we'll just see. Then it's our callback function. So inside the callback function, we're going to check to see if these values are greater than what's in our global variables, and if they are, we're going to change our global variables. So we're going to say if current score is greater than our global variable high score, then we're going to have our squiggly brackets. So this stuff in here only executes if this if statement is true. So we're going to say if current score is greater than high score, we're going to set high score equal to current score, semicolon, and then we're going to set high score name equal to current name. Then finally, the last part of this if, we're going to call the function display high score again so that it can update these labels with whatever is scored in these global variables. Let's try running it and see what happens. So let's actually go over to data so we can actually see the data get entered. So we're going to say run, and it starts out with no name and 0 because those were the default values of global variables. So I'm going to start with Jill, and I'm going to give Jill a score of 2. So we hit record score, and then it entered in the database, and we can see it updated the label. Then I'm going to give Jack, and Jack only has a score of 1, so it added it to the database, but it didn't change this because Jill still has a high score. Then we'll say Samantha, and Samantha has a score of 13. We'll say record score, and there we go. It's entered Samantha, and it updated that label right there. And we can clear the table if we want, and then record new scores. We can export the data if we want. We could use this, to record data for a survey or whatever we wanted, and then we'd have access to all the data that was entered. Now, the really interesting thing is, let's, stop the program and run it again. It's still got that data there. So even though we stopped the program, it pulled the data out of the database. So I'm going to go back to code, and we could look at this in blocks too if we wanted. I prefer to use it text most of the time, but sometimes it's a little easier to look at it in blocks. Scroll over a little bit here so you can just see that. So, I'd be interested to hear about what kinds of things you might do with this program. If you write any programs, please share them in the comments. You can subscribe to my channel right here. And if you're interested in any more programming tutorials, please check out my YouTube channel.